The strangest thing about losing everything is that sometimes the person who helps you find your way back is a complete stranger. I was standing in the middle of a crowded farmers market in downtown Portland, Oregon, counting the few dollars left in my wallet, when a woman suddenly grabbed my arm, stepped close enough that I could feel her trembling, and whispered that I needed to play along. Before I could even ask what she meant, she slipped her hand around my arm and leaned against me as if we had known each other for years. What happened during the next 20 minutes would change the direction of my life in a way I never could have imagined. If you still believe that kindness can arrive when we least expect it, that people deserve hope, forgiveness, compassion, and second chances, take a moment to like this story, share it with someone who needs encouragement, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. You never know whose heart might need to hear a story like this today. My name is Nathan, and at 38, I had become very good at pretending I was fine. 6 months earlier, I had lost my job at a small construction company after the owner retired unexpectedly. Around the same time, my father had passed away after a long illness, leaving behind a modest house in Oregon and a lifetime of memories I wasn't ready to face. I had been trying to keep up with the mortgage and repairs while searching for work, but every rejection letter seemed to take another piece of confidence from me. That morning, I had gone to the market hoping to buy a loaf of bread, some apples, and perhaps something inexpensive enough to make dinner feel less lonely. Then came the woman. Her name, I would later learn, was Grace Whitmore. She looked to be in her early 30s, dressed simply in a blue cardigan, carrying a canvas bag filled with vegetables. But the moment she grabbed my arm, her calm appearance disappeared. Her fingers were cold, and her eyes kept darting toward a man standing near the coffee stall. She whispered that the man was someone she desperately wanted to avoid and begged me to pretend we were together until he left. I didn't know her, but there was something in her expression that made me believe she wasn't playing a game. So I nodded and quietly went along with it. We walked slowly through the market, pretending to discuss dinner plans while the man eventually moved away. Grace didn't let go of my arm until he disappeared into the crowd. Then she apologized repeatedly and explained that she had been trying to avoid an uncomfortable situation involving a former business partner who had blamed her for the collapse of their small catering company. She had come to the market to gather ingredients for a community dinner she organized every Saturday for people who were struggling financially. I laughed softly and told her that I was probably the least convincing pretend boyfriend she could have chosen because I looked like a man who had forgotten what happiness felt like. Instead of laughing at me, Grace looked at me carefully and said that sometimes people who looked lost simply needed someone to remind them they still had somewhere to go. Those words stayed with me. Before leaving, she noticed the worn-out work gloves sticking from my jacket pocket. She asked if I did construction work. I told her about my experience, expecting nothing from the conversation. 2 days later, she called me. Her community center needed someone to repair several broken doors, shelves, and cabinets before winter. It wasn't a permanent position, but it was paid work. I accepted. What began as a small repair job slowly became something more. Grace introduced me to local business owners who needed contractors. One of them, a man named Thomas, offered me regular renovation work. Within a few months, I was earning enough to keep my father's house and begin paying down the debts that had been crushing me. But Grace wasn't finished changing my life. One evening, she asked me to help repair an old wooden table at the community center. As I sanded the rough surface, she told me that her father had once taught her never to judge people by what they were carrying because sometimes the heaviest things were invisible. She admitted that she had been struggling too. The catering business had failed, her confidence had disappeared, and she had spent months believing she had ruined everything. We sat there in the quiet room, two strangers who had somehow found each other on a crowded market morning, and realized we had both been trying to survive the same feeling, believing our best days were already behind us. Months later, the community center held its largest dinner of the year. Families filled the room, volunteers carried steaming dishes from the kitchen, and children laughed at tables decorated with handmade paper stars. I stood near the doorway watching Grace greet everyone with the same warmth she had shown me on that strange morning. Then she handed me a small envelope. Inside was a photograph of the two of us from that first market day. On the back she had written a simple sentence: "Sometimes God sends people into our lives disguised as interruptions." I couldn't stop the tears. I had gone to that market thinking I was only buying bread. Instead, I found work, friendship, purpose, and a reason to believe that my life wasn't over just because one chapter had ended. Grace had grabbed my arm that morning because she needed someone to play along. But in the end, she was the one who helped me become myself again. And perhaps that is the quiet miracle of kindness. We often imagine that changing someone's life requires money, power, or some extraordinary sacrifice. Sometimes it only requires noticing that another human being is struggling and choosing not to walk past. If this story touched something inside your heart, please let the video know by liking it, sharing it with someone who could use a little hope, and staying connected to stories that remind us that kindness still matters. And before you go, leave a comment telling me about one person who unexpectedly changed your life for the better. Your story might become the encouragement someone else needs today. Nathan never forgot that market morning. Not because a stranger asked him to pretend for 20 minutes, but because those 20 minutes reminded him of something he had forgotten. Sometimes life doesn't change when everything becomes easier. Sometimes life changes when someone reaches for your arm in the middle of your hardest day and quietly reminds you that you don't have to face it alone.